This is a 20-question exam for the Microsoft Certified Azure Data Fundamentals DP-900 certification. So in this video, we're just going to walk through 20 questions to practice for the exam to hopefully get you ready to take the certification. Question number 1. Which of the following is not an analytical data store in Azure? Synapse Analytics, that certainly is an analytical data store in Azure. Cosmos DB, Data Explorer, or Active Directory. So the answer to this is Active Directory is for authentication. It is not for analytical data store in Azure. Question 2. For exploring and analyzing large volumes of diverse data in real time, which Azure service is most suitable? Data Factory, Data Explorer, HD Insight, or Blob Storage? The key to this question is large volumes of real-time data is most suitable. So real-time data might make you think HD Insight, but that would be referring to storage. Data Factories for building pipelines. So the answer to this is Data Explorer. When considering real-time data analytics, which factor is critical for ensuring timely insights? Data redundancy, data latency, data visualization aesthetics, or fragmentation? The key to this question again, real-time data analytics for timely insights or quick insights. Which of these answers relates to quickness? The answer is latency. For the gamers out there. Which feature in Power BI helps in creating hierarchical relationships between tables and columns? Hierarchies are like trees of relationships. So how do you create that in Power BI? You might think, okay, so relationships, hierarchies, drill through, or bookmarks? Well, bookmarks and drill through really don't have any place in Power BI. So relationships and hierarchies. Well, hierarchies is right there in the description, but if you use Power BI, you'll know that this answer is relationships. During data ingestion, which of the following becomes critical due to the sheer volume of data? So the data integrity, data visualization, data reduction, or data playback? The key to this question is first, during data ingestion, during the input of data, the processing of data, what is critical when you have a large volume of data? Well, is it important to visualize that right away? Probably not. You don't want to reduce it. That's just a silly answer. And playback? I've never even heard of that. So the answer to this is integrity. Which consistency level in Cosmos DB provides the highest availability but might allow readers to see out of order writes? Strong, bounded staleness, consistent prefix, or eventful? Which consistency level? So you want to know the consistency levels in Azure Cosmos DB. So which one is the highest availability but might result in out of order writes? The answer is eventful. What feature does Azure Cosmos DB provide to automatically distribute data globally? Global distributor, georeplication, multi-region writes, or global partitioning? Well, in Azure Cosmos DB, it supports only one of these features for global distribution of data, and that one is multi-region writes. Yep, multi-region writes. Which of the following Azure Cosmos DB APIs provides a native model for storing hierarchical and multi-object JSON documents. Gremlin, Cassandra, MongoDB, or Table. The key here is first, it's an Azure Cosmos DB. And second, it has to store JSON documents. Well, JSON documents are NoSQL. Cosmos DB is a NoSQL database. Gremlin stores graph connections. Does this refer to graph connections? No, because it's JSON documents. Well, Cassandra stores column family data. Table data is key value pairs, which only leaves MongoDB, NoSQL database, for storing JSON documents. Which replication option in Azure Blob Storage provides the highest storability by replicating data to a second region? Locally redundant storage, or LRS, geozone redundant storage, or GZRS, zone redundant storage, ZRS, or premium storage? Well, the key here is Azure Blob Storage, and we're looking for replication to a second region. So if you're familiar with availability zones from AZ-900 certification, you'll recall that availability zones are data centers within a specific region. And here we need to replicate to a second region. To get to a second region, we need geozone redundant storage to get to a second region. Premium storage is not even related to replication to regions. Locally redundant storage is within the data center. It's just multiple copies of the data. Zone redundant storage is copying within the zone, but geozone is across regions. Which of the following is not an API model supported by Azure Cosmos DB? So Azure Cosmos DB supports multiple models: Cassandra, MongoDB, SQL Server, or Gremlin. So Azure Cosmos DB, it does support Cassandra. Cassandra is a column family database. Azure Cosmos DB does support MongoDB. MongoDB is a NoSQL document database for JSON documents. Azure Cosmos DB does support Gremlin. Gremlin is a graph database. But Azure Cosmos DB does not support SQL Server because SQL Server is its own instance separate from Azure Cosmos DB. Which of the following database types is designed based on the association between data elements? Document-based, key value, relational, or graph? So the key here is association between data elements. Association. That makes me think document-based, there's no associations. It's unlikely. Key value doesn't really fit associations. That's more like a table storage. Relational and graph both deal with associations, but graph is more dealing with graphs, which makes relational between tables, association between data elements. Which of the following best describes unstructured data? It has a strict schema. It always uses hierarchies or tags. It lacks a specific form or model. It's typically stored in relational databases. Unstructured data is blob files, blob storage, such as audio files, images, raw memos, or raw text documents. And they do not have a strict schema. They're binary data. They do not always use hierarchies or tags, although they can. They are not stored in relational databases because relational databases require strict schemas. Therefore, the answer is it lacks a specific form or model. What is a common way to represent semi-structured data? Spreadsheets, Word documents, audio files, or XML files. So the key here is that you have structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data. Structured data would be relational data, transactional data, such as tables or business transactions. Semi-structured data would be JSON documents or XML files that have semi-structure. Unstructured data, of course, would be spreadsheets, arguably. Word documents and audio files are all binary files. Which of the following is a way to represent data? UML, Unified Modeling Language, relational databases, hierarchical databases, or all of the above. So, when representing data, you can indeed use UML diagrams to represent relationships between entities in a UML diagram. Of course, relational databases such as SQL Server can absolutely be used to represent data via schemas. Hierarchical databases such as Gremlin can indeed represent graph interfaces of data. Therefore, the answer is all of the above. Which of the following is a feature unique to structured data? It can be easily queried. It can be in the form of audio files. It does not have a defined schema. It is mostly textual. So, structured data, as we mentioned, has a strong schema. It's often transactional and stored in SQL Server in relational databases. So, therefore, it does not have a defined schema. We know that's not the answer. It's mostly textual. No, that doesn't really fit. It can be in the form of audio files. No, that would be unstructured data. But structured data can be easily queried in SQL Server. Azure's version of PostgreSQL as a fully managed service is called Azure PostgreSQL, Azure SQL PostgreSQL, that's a hard one to say, PostgreSQL and Azure Virtual Machines, or Azure PostgreSQL Database. This one's a real tongue twister, but if you're familiar with the Azure platform offerings, you'll know that the answer to this is Azure PostgreSQL. What database object contains a set of SQL commands that you can save and reuse? A trigger, a stored procedure, a view, or a schema. So it's a database object. These are all database objects. Although a trigger is not really a database object, but that contains a set of SQL commands to save and reuse. SQL commands, that's SQL queries that can be saved and reused. So if you're reusing code, is that a trigger? No. A stored procedure? Probably. A view? Could be, right? You can share queries and save them as visuals or schema. Well, the answer is a stored procedure. Which SQL statement is used to retrieve data from a database? An insert statement, an update statement, a get, or select. Retrieve data. So you're reading data. The answer to this in SQL, to read data from a database, is a select statement, or a DQL language, a DQL command. Which database object represents a subset of data from one or more tables? A trigger, a store procedure, a schema, or a view? A subset of data from one or more tables? The answer to this is a view. Which of the following represents a two-dimensional table of data with rows and columns? This is our last question. A schema, a relation, a view, or store procedure? A two-dimensional table of data with rows and columns. So the key here is a table with rows and columns. Which is a table with rows and columns? Well, a store procedure is not a table. A schema is not a table. So is it a relation or a view? Well, with rows and columns. We know that a relation is what you call a transactional database table. It's also called a relation. And a row in a transactional database like SQL Server is also called a tuple. So the relation is the table, the rows are the tuples. And that's the answer. I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation of the DP-900 certification exam questions. If you like this and you'd like to see more questions, please like and subscribe and let me know in the comments, and I can do another batch of the next 20 questions as we study for our DP-900 Azure Microsoft certification.